Well, as you know, we've been bombarded with two different versions of events of those strikes that hit Syria in mid-April. And today, the Russian Defense Ministry really upped the ante by providing some actual tangible evidence of those missiles it says were either intercepted or simply malfunctioned. And this is going to be an embarrassing development for the US side, which had lauded the success of those 105 airstrikes, which it said were precise and overwhelming, also dismissing any suggestions by Russia that any of those missiles had been intercepted, also insisting that the Syrian air defense capabilities had been largely ineffective, with Syrian missiles merely being fired into open air. Take a listen.
With way over 100 missiles shot in, they didn't shoot one down. The equipment didn't work too well, their equipment, and they didn't shoot one. You know, you heard, oh, they shot 40 down, then they shot 15 down. They watched. Then I called, I said, did they? No, sir. Every single one hit its target.
So I think we can be quite confident and say that the US side is not going to let this lie, probably already crafting a response email or response statement, should I say, as we speak. The Russian Defense Ministry also went into detail earlier about the targets of those 105 missiles. Only 22 of those 105 missiles actually hit their intended targets. And it's been revealed that they actually hit civilian objects rather than the alleged chemical supplies the US has been so persistent upon. Take a listen.
Some of the missiles didn't reach the targets, apparently due to malfunctions. They were a threat to civilians there, in civilian buildings. At the same time, the logic of the US, UK, and France in choosing the targets is unclear. They say there were stockpiles of toxic agents there. If they were hit by cruise missiles, this could lead to widespread poisoning. And if it was for Damascus itself, tens of thousands of people could have died.
So this latest development is probably going to deal a blow to the US president's ego as well. He had boasted so optimistically about the performance of his missiles, and after those strikes, he even saw his popularity on the upturn, with his approval rating jumping a few percentage points. So this turnabout is not something we could expect him to let lie.
Well, let's see what security analyst and former UK Army officer Charles Shoebridge has to say about this. He's at our studios in London right now. Hello again, welcome to RT. You look at both sides saying what they say about what happened in Syria. The discrepancies are huge. Why do you think they're so far apart on what they say happened in Syria a couple of weeks ago?
Well, of course, there are two competing stories because there are two competing narratives, as we know, but all credit to RT for mentioning both of them, and the fact that actually there are two narratives. If you listen to the West media, of course, especially British and American media, almost uniformly, there is only one narrative and anything else is just simply ridiculed. I mean, the truth may be that all of these weapons got through despite the evidence for today, and I can come on to that in a moment, or that only 20-odd came through, or some figure in between, which is perhaps where the truth might lie. But certainly the existence of fragments like this could point to the fact that some missiles malfunctioned, were shot down, or simply landed in the wrong place. But even from a successful strike, you will find some fragments from the weapons used, but usually not in the kind of sizes that we're talking about here. And so, although I haven't seen all of the footage that's being presented today by the Russian Defense Ministry or by the military, it certainly suggests that at least some of those missiles did malfunction. And indeed, with such a large number of weapons being fired and anti-aircraft fire being directed at them, you would expect, at the very least, a small proportion of them not to get through. So it may well be that the final truth, if it's ever revealed, lies somewhere in between. But regardless of this, the fact that you've got in the possession of Russia missile parts of what are quite sophisticated weapon systems that Russia has openly declared, and you would expect that, that they are going to be examining this to see if their air defense systems and their jamming systems and so on, electronic jamming systems, can be improved yet further from examining these fragments and remains of these British, American and presumably French weapon systems. That will be a source of great concern, I think, to the American, British and French side, particularly given that the impact of these strikes in terms of affecting the military capabilities of Syria, even less Russia, of course, has been so limited. And therefore, there's not much of a return, a reward-risk ratio, if you see what I mean, has been satisfied here. In other words, the Russians have gained some technical knowledge of weapon systems that actually were sacrificed by the West or by those three powers, really at great risk for actually not much tangible benefit on the ground, given that these were largely civilian or empty targets.
Charles, do you expect any acknowledgement from any top brass in Washington on this? I know we're used to Donald Trump speaking like this. Everything's the biggest, the best, that he'd claim credit for Tuesday if he could. But do you expect any of the military top brass to at least acknowledge that, yes, OK, we hit the targets, but some may not?
Yeah, I mean, there are two questions at least. I mean, there are many questions, of course, over this whole incident, let alone the Duma incident, but also the response to it. The legal aspects are some of those, but the military capabilities, as you suggest, are also one of those issues that are rightly being questioned here. But of course, the way that it will be handled publicly will be probably the way that it's usually handled, which is either it will be ignored or think tanks and so-called experts will be asked and tasked, if you like, to ridicule those Russian reports. But no matter what evidence is put on the screen, it's spun in a certain way, and that applies, of course, to all countries and all media, or most media, and certainly it applies to the West media at the moment. You'll only hear the one side. But really, what's interesting, of course, is that the Russians today have said, the Russian side has said that its tests of these target areas has produced no evidence of chemical weapons, even in small quantities, being present. And that, of course, what I would say on that is that that is actually consistent with what was being reported by media outside the UK and US and France pretty much at the time. You remember that even the day after those strikes, when those buildings were still burning and there was a lot of smoke and fumes still around, you had large crowds of reporters, albeit not British and American and French reporters for whatever reason, but other reporters from India and elsewhere were on the scene, not wearing protective equipment, and the scientists and the people working in those buildings were also there to say, if there were chemical weapons here, we certainly wouldn't be able to stand here now without protective equipment. And one further quick point on this is that, of course, this is also consistent with what the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have themselves consistently reported, repeatedly reported, in their inspection visit reports to these plants. As late as November 2017, the OPCW was stating in its reports only published in March of this year, just a couple of weeks before these strikes, that there was no evidence of any illicit chemical weapons activities or storage going on at these plants.
I guess the rule of thumb is listen to everybody, make your own mind up. For now, security analyst and former British Army officer Charles Shoebridge, I really appreciate your insight on this again. Thanks very much.